Here's a guy who says he's not convinced of atheism.
Why I'm not convinced of atheism? We got the NASA shirt right there. But most atheists would say that they're not convinced of religion and that, no, I don't believe in Sky Daddy and we have science now and humanity has moved on. I'm not convinced of religion anymore. It's an old teaching. But I would actually say that I'm not convinced of atheism.
Is somebody trying to convince you of atheism? A lot of atheists simply use the term to mean that they lack a belief in a god. By that definition, atheism isn't even necessarily a claim. There's nothing to be convinced of.
So first I'm gonna tell more practical reasons that may not be as forcing, and then in the end of the video I'll give you kind of the argument that I would use if I were debating this. But I'm not a debater, I'm not a philosopher. I'm just documenting my self-improvement and philosophy journey on this channel. So the first thing is that most atheists live inconsistently to their worldview.
So most atheists worship a god?
And well, most atheists don't ever have any sort of philosophical training.
And most Christians don't have any sort of theological training. What's your point?
But most atheists assume things like meaning, assume things like morals.
I assume neither of those things. I'm not sure what meaning in this context even means. Does it mean purpose?
But these things don't exist on atheism.
That's why I don't assume them. However, I don't think they exist under theism either. Even if there is a god who dictates meaning and morals, that doesn't make these things any less subjective or any more real. There's no objective, non-circular reason why we ought to follow God's purposes or morals.
But you have to assume these things to have a worldview at all.
Why? What do you think a worldview is?
To live your life, to live your everyday life at all.
Why? I just do whatever I feel like doing whenever I feel like doing it. Why does that require me to subscribe to any system of meaning or morals?
So most atheists are inconsistent, and most atheists have absolutely no idea what their worldview entails for them. And yeah, that's basically the first reason.
Why is that a reason to believe in God?
The second reason, this is probably the number one thing. If there's an atheist, I ask them about morals, and most people have never even thought of this thing, which is kind of sad. But the atheists who have really got into this will be able to say like, yeah, morals don't exist, but moral relativism. On atheism, there are no morals.
What do you even mean by morals? I have a conscience. I do what my conscience tells me. I don't believe that what my conscience tells me reflects any kind of objective morality, but so what? Why would it have to? I'm going to do what my conscience forces me to do, whether it conforms to some objective system of morality or not, so what difference would such a system make?
There just is. If you're born on this planet, and this planet that smashed into whatever life came out, there is no good or bad.
Objectively, I think that's right, but that doesn't stop me from liking some things and disliking others. That's what motivates my behavior, regardless of whether what I like or dislike is based on any objective moral or ethical standard, so why is such a standard necessary?
There just is this physical matter that moves. There is no right or wrong. And but most atheists would like to make some moral claims. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, you must support women's rights. Oh, you shouldn't marry a child. Oh, you shouldn't be murdering people. Why?
I try not to tell people what they should or shouldn't do. At most, if a person ultimately wants the same things I want, I will tell them how I think we can most effectively achieve them, but then I'm making practical assertions, not moral ones. If somebody wants fundamentally different things than I do, then I will either avoid them or try to obstruct them from doing what I don't want them to do. I'm not going to try to convince them to share my values because I don't think that would work, even if I thought they were based on some objective standard. There's a reason why we didn't send philosophers and theologians to the beaches of Normandy.
I mean, well, yeah, as a religious person, I do agree you shouldn't do those things. But why? On atheism, why shouldn't you do that?
Why, according to theism, shouldn't you do those things? Because God says so? Why is it moral to do what God says? Also because God says so? You see the problem there, don't you?
If you want to do that, why not? And I mean, if you say like, well, other people don't like, well, society doesn't work. Well, why should I respect these things?
Why should you respect God?
I'm born on this planet. There are no morals, there just is. There just are facts. Why wouldn't I do that if I wanted to do that? And better yet, if there's no free will, because on atheism there's no free will, you can't even blame me for it.
Quite the opposite. The only reason to blame somebody for doing something is so you can impose a disincentive on them to reduce the likelihood that they'll do it again. Disincentives would be entirely pointless if they didn't exert at least some causal and deterministic influence on a person's behavior. The behavior of a person with complete free will would not be reformable at all. There would be nothing you could do to change their behavior.
If I go on and do all these heinous acts, you can't even blame me on atheism. Because on atheism, you would say that I don't have free will. So, everything I did was determined already. My brain chemistry forced me to do what I did. So you can't even blame me about it.
Incentives and disincentives exert a causal influence over your brain chemistry, which is why it's useful to impose them. That is, in fact, the entire point of holding people responsible for their actions.
And finally, the third thing is the argument that I would make, and that is basically, it ties into the free will thing. So if atheism is true, then we don't have free will.
That's not even true. I don't believe that we do have free will, but since not every physical event behaves deterministically, if we did have free will, we wouldn't need God to explain it.
And determinism, so basically the position that we don't have free will, is self-contradictory. And a self-contradictory position cannot be true, and therefore atheism is false.
How is determinism self-contradictory?
So, for example, if I'm debating an atheist on free will, well, they're gonna actually have to assume free will to come even debate me. They're gonna have to assume the free will to analyze evidence, to analyze arguments, and to come to intellectual truth.
Why? I really don't see why I would need free will to do any of those things. Rational thinking doesn't seem free at all. If I deduce a conclusion from a set of premises, I don't at all feel like I'm freely drawing that conclusion. For example, if I believe that it's true that all dogs are mammals, and I believe it's true that all mammals are vertebrates, then I won't be able to help but believe it to be true that all dogs are vertebrates. I don't freely draw that conclusion at all. I draw that conclusion because if I believe the premises are true, I won't even be able to understand what it would mean for the conclusion to not be true. I don't see why logical analysis requires free will, given that logical deduction forces beliefs on me like this.
But that doesn't exist on determinism. You don't arrive at conclusions because of your intellect and your thinking. You arrive at conclusions because the brain chemistry determined you to arrive at those conclusions.
Given that I can't help but arrive at conclusions that follow by logical necessity, I don't see how my reasoning would be free either way.
And your debates aren't going to intellectually affect people's minds. The only thing that there is are the brain chemicals that were already determined to act in the way that they act.
But what I say to a person is part of what predetermines how their brain chemicals will act. In fact, if their minds acted with complete freedom, then my arguments couldn't have any effect on them at all. It is only if people have complete free will that arguing with them would be pointless, because their conclusions would be completely causally isolated from any such input.
It's a self-contradictory position.
It would be self-contradictory to try to influence a person's beliefs while also asserting that their beliefs are free of causal influence. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.